The Sacred Fire by Whitaker Ringwald. Chapter 5. Tyler. Welcome to the game. You were logged in as Tyler. You were 17 years old in excellent health aside from a few hunger pangs. Aside from the urn of love, you should not open under any circumstances. You are unarmed and there are no weapons currently available. Your strength resides in your superior intellect. Your objectives: deliver the urn of love to Zeus so that it can be destroyed. Convince Zeus to free your cousin Jax from the clutches of the arch villain Ricardo, aka Epimetheus. And finally, save Pyra, the girl of your dreams. This is a solo mission. Your location is a portal through which you will enter the realm of the gods. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning to complete your mission. Start game. Chapter 6. Ethan. Fact. We exist in a three-dimensional space. We can move up and down, sideways. We can step in and out. The space we move in can be measured. But the English philosopher John G. Bennett thought that there were three more dimensions that we couldn't see, and one of these was called eternity. Eternity was a timeless time, immeasurable, and that's where Tyler was going. Boston Common was a large public park in the middle of Boston. Even though it was dinner time, the park was filled with people. A group of Peruvians were performing on their flutes and selling CDs. A professional dog walker nearly ran us over as her pack of mutts spotted a squirrel. A family walked past. The little boy was carrying a plastic sword and attacking the bushes. I thought of Tyler's sword collection. Tyler, who was walking quickly, didn't seem to notice the kid. I guess I was looking for distractions, anything to keep my mind from focusing on the facts. I followed Tyler down a path to a fountain. It was called Brewer Fountain. Four large bronze statues sat at the base, water spouting past their shoulders. Tyler had told us their stories. The young man and woman had been in love, but a jealous Cyclops had killed the man, smashing him with a boulder. So much blood ran from his dead body that it formed a river which was named after him, the Acis River. The older pair was the god of the sea Poseidon and his sea nymph wife. Yesterday, we'd watched Pyrrhus stand in front of Poseidon and disappear into thin air. She reappeared a few hours later, her hair in a different style and dressed in new clothes. I know this is a cliche, but I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own two eyes. The Poseidon statue was a portal of some sort leading to the realm of the gods. Pyra told us that she'd traveled through the portal and that she'd have given the urn of hope to Zeus and then it had been destroyed. It was great news, especially for Tyler, who'd been a victim of the urn. Then Pyra surprised Tyler with a gift, a small vial of green liquid. Even though Tyler had insisted that he'd recovered from the effects of having hope drained from his soul, Pyra had sensed that some sadness still lingered. Tyler drank the elixir and was back to his old snarky self. That's when I really knew that it wasn't a magic trick. Pyra was the real deal. Just when we reached the fountain, Tyler's phone buzzed. "Is it Ricardo?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "It's Dad," he said, reading the screen. He says, "Glad you're having fun. I'm working on a project at the office. Call tomorrow when you're on your way home." It was a huge relief to know that Dad wasn't worried. We were in the clear for one more night, but I wished that we'd hear from Jax. Tyler texted back, "Thanks." Then he started and stared at the fountain. "Okay, so I'll go into the portal and tell Zeus what's going on." "And then what?" "I still don't know," he said. "Hopefully he'll help us. Maybe he'll come back with me and deal with Ricardo face to face. But in any case, I'll meet you here as soon as I can." He didn't seem one bit nervous. He was acting like this was an ordinary outing, like he was going into Starbucks to get a latte. But he was about to step into a world populated by mythological creatures. "What if it's not that easy?" I asked. "Zeus is the king of the gods. What if he's too busy to help or doesn't care about Ricardo anymore?" Tyler scratched his chin. "Well, if he doesn't care about Ricardo, he might still care about Pyra. I'll tell him she's in danger. I'll tell him she's been kidnapped." You're gonna lie to Zeus? My stomach was clenching again. Technically, Pyra hadn't been taken hostage. She'd volunteered to jump into Ricardo's car. Do you want to save Jax or not? He snapped. I didn't need to answer that question. He handed me the keys to the car. Just in case, he said. Just in case what? In case I don't make it back. I gulped. Then I took the keys. He didn't bother rolling up his jeans or taking off his shoes, and he didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He stepped into the fountain. Hey, I said, now that I think about it, shouldn't we both go? I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to be left alone either. I mean, what if you need my help over there? Over there, in another dimension. This was crazy. Should I bring a suitcase? Should I bring an extra inhaler in case I'm allergic to a Pegasus dander? Who knows what kind of pollen floats around in eternity? You'd better take this too. He handed me his phone. I doubt the gods have cell phones. I laughed, but I was so nervous it came out as a strangled squeak. I clutched the phone and keys in one hand. My other hand was still cupping the urn of love. If I don't come back, you'll be the only person who will know what happened to Jax, Tyler said, and what happened to me. We looked at each other. Tyler and I had never been super close. He wasn't the kind of older brother who'd held my hand when I was a toddler, or who'd included me in any of his activities. He'd ignored me most of the time. Though we lived in the same house, we'd lived very separate lives. But the events of the summer had brought us closer. Because the urn of hope, Tyler had almost died, and that had been the worst thing I'd ever experienced. But now here we were, talking about the possibility of never seeing each other again. Having me stay behind made perfect logical sense. I was the only link between Jax, Ricardo, Tyler, and Great Aunt Juniper. If both Tyler and I disappeared, Mom and Dad might never know what became of us. Hey, kid, there's no swimming in the fountain, an old man called. We ignored him. How long should I wait for you? I asked. I don't know, as long as you can. You might have to lie to Mom and Dad some more. Be careful, I told him. No one had to remind me about not taking unnecessary risks, but Tyler and I were as different as night and day. He stepped in puddles without considering their depth. He walked right into the middle of a crowd without making sure there were nearby exits. He even used public ketchup bottles. Risk aversion was definitely not part of his DNA sequencing. I handed him the urn of love. Without another word, he turned away and started walking across the fountain toward Poseidon. I wanted to offer him some advice, but what could I say? Try not to make Zeus mad, I hollered. Tyler was good at many things, but he was an expert on annoying people. Most of the gamers I'd met were annoying. They had opinions, and if you didn't know what obscure fantasy character they were referring to or a particular episode of Doctor Who, they acted like you were stupid. If Tyler and Zeus got into a conversation and Zeus didn't know anything about online multiplayer formats, Tyler might insult him. And don't lose the bag or you can't get back. Tyler whipped around. The bag! He cried. I left it in the car. Oh my God. I'll get it. I ran as fast as I could. It took me exactly 3.3 minutes to get to our parking spot. I unlocked the car and grabbed Pyra's leather bag. I relocked the car and ran. The bag slung over my shoulder. By the time I made it back, I was completely out of breath. Luckily, no one seemed to care that Tyler was still standing in the fountain. Hey, I called, holding up the bag. Unfortunately, the Peruvian band was now standing on the pathway quite close to Tyler. The drums were loud enough to drown out my voice. Tyler stared at Poseidon like he was in some sort of trance. Trying not to think about the fact that some of the worst diseases that inflict mankind are carried by filthy water, I climbed into the basin and sloshed up to him. Here! He pointed to the statue. Look! Like the other three statues, Poseidon sat on a ledge. He wore a laurel wreath on his head. His beard was long and wavy, and his chest was bare. He sat with his hand resting on his knee, his face turned toward his sea nymph wife, who sat on another ledge. What was I supposed to be looking at? Nothing seemed unusual. There! Tyler said, his finger jabbing the air in front of Poseidon's eyes. A slight flicker of light came from inside the bronze eyes. I shivered. Then I looked at the bag. The golden trident had begun to blow. The bag was vibrating. I shoved the car keys and phone into my pocket. Then I yanked the bag off my shoulder. It's starting to do something, I hollered as the flute playing reached an obnoxious volume. Take it! Hurry! Tyler grabbed the bag, but before I let go, the ground disappeared and I fell into darkness. Chapter 7. Jax. We drove in silence for a long while. Ricardo was busy texting. He sure had a lot to say because his thumbs were flying. With his gaze focused on his screen, I took the opportunity to sneak a little closer look at him. He didn't have any wrinkles on his face and no crow's feet around his eyes, so even though I knew he was Pyra's dad, he seemed so young. My mom has a special cream she puts on at night to fill in the lines around her eyes. I guess being immortal meant you didn't need to worry about things like that. As I thought about my mom, an ache spread across my chest. Would I ever see her again? Tears waited, pushing at the corners of my eyes. I clenched my fists, refusing to cry. I would get out of this situation. I would see Mom again. It's stuffy in here, I complained. Can we roll down the window? Without looking up, Ricardo tapped on the driver's glass screen. A moment later, my window rolled down 2 inches and a breeze trickled in. I felt like a dog, pointing my nose at the crack and inhaling the cool air. I hadn't realized how much I'd been sweating. Pyra was sitting quietly, also watching her father. Mother misses you, she said. He didn't respond. She wants you to come home. She is going to speak to Zeus and... Zeus? He looked up. His eyes were freaky. They seemed to change color with his moods. At the moment, a gray storm churned around his pupils. Zeus is irrelevant. He banished himself from this land. The people no longer worship him. In this world, Zeus is only found in museums. And in books, I said. I checked out one at the Chatham Public Library. Not my usual reading material, but hey, when you're thrust into a Greek god soap opera, you might as well do some research. He dismissed my comment with a wave of his hand. Once I have claimed this world, Zeus's name will be erased from history. All images of him will be destroyed. All literary references will also be destroyed. He sounded totally confident, as if Zeus were a bug on the sidewalk and all he had to do was step on him. Ugh. Just so you know, burning books doesn't work around here. People keep trying it, but the stories always survive. He finally blinked. Had I struck some kind of nerve? Then his voice turned so cold I swear the air turned cold too. I shall be victorious, and the memory of Zeus will dissolve like dust in water. Wow, he really hated Zeus. Greek mythology had never meant that much to me. Tyler was the expert on the subject. Most of the games he played had something to do with the mythological world. Even that card game tournament he'd won, Magic the Gathering, was full of Greek gods and monsters. Tyler and his friends played the game at Merlin's comic book store. They'd be devastated if Ricardo burned the place down. No matter how much you don't like Zeus, you can't erase history, I said. Was that a smile at the corner of his mouth? Of course I can. He told me as if speaking to the stupidest person on earth. Civilizations are erased by conquerors, and new civilizations arise time and time again. I was beginning to realize that Ricardo was actually crazy. Piper had been quietly observing her dad. Was she also realizing that he was crazy? Or maybe she already knew. What about mother? She asked sadly. Do you not miss her? Do you not want to see her again? Pandora is free to come here and join me. You know she cannot do that. It is against Zeus's laws. In this new world, only my laws will matter. Then he looked down at his phone and began texting again. It was weird to see a villain do something as commonplace as send a text, but I suppose his texts were anything but commonplace. They probably included the words destroy, terrorize, and doom. Pyra sighed with frustration. There would be no reasoning with him. As much as Ricardo hated Zeus, I was beginning to hate Ricardo. Not because he was hurting people, he'd kidnapped me and he was planning on taking over the world, but also because he'd hurt my own family in a very personal way. While I was seriously afraid of him and I knew I should probably shut up, I wanted to know the truth. Why is my dad in jail? I asked. He stopped texting, an eyebrow raised, but no answer came. Was he going to pretend he didn't know what I was talking about? My father, Isaac Romero, is in the Brookville Federal Prison Camp. He was working for the International Society of Archaeologists with my great aunt, and then he was arrested for theft, but he didn't do it. Up until last month, I hadn't known my father's name. Mom thought he abandoned us when I was a baby. Before she had a stroke, great aunt Juniper told me all about him. He was called the locksmith because he was an expert on creating elaborate security systems, but he'd been unfairly arrested and had spent most of his life in prison. Because I was curious about him, and because he'd worked with great Aunt Juniper, we'd driven to Brookville to meet him and to get information about the urns. He's in prison because of you. You set him up, I said. Part of me was really scared at that moment. I just accused a madman of sending an innocent man to jail, but the other part of me wanted justice for my dad, so I looked Ricardo right in his immortal eyes. Why? His mouth tightened and that vein appeared again. He knew exactly what I was talking about. The locksmith is a brilliant man, he said. He was complimenting my dad. I hadn't been expecting that reaction. Are you telling me you set him up because he's smarter than you? His eyes flashed again and I cringed. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. He sat back against his seat, crossed his right leg over his left, and gave me his full on attention. I suddenly felt very small. You are a talkative creature, he said. So I've been told. I stuck my hands into the pockets of my purple jacket so he wouldn't see that they'd started trembling. But I want answers. Ira was listening but remained silent. A strand of black hair fell across Ricardo's forehead. He pushed it aside. The locksmith was assisting Juniper, making it difficult for me to retrieve my urns. I needed to relocate him so he could no longer interfere with my quest. A pang of sadness hit me. Tyler loved that word, quest. Would I ever see my cousins again? Ricardo sneered. I needed to eliminate him. Relocate? Eliminate? So it's true? My dad didn't steal anything? One corner of Ricardo's mouth turned up. Just a little. Just enough for me to know that he was proud of himself. He pressed his fingertips together. How very easy it is to control the minds of mortals. When the mask of Agamemnon disappeared from the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, it took little effort to convince the Athenian police chief to put a few fingerprints exactly where they needed to be placed. Of course! Ricardo had used the urn of faith on the police chief. He'd sent my father to prison. My face felt real hot, and my vision got blurry as tears stung my eyes. Ricardo had ruined my dad's life, my mom's life, my life. Pyra reached out to touch my shoulder, but I pulled away. I stared out the window. We were still on the freeway. It was starting to get dark. I'd missed dinner and my stomach felt hollow. How long had we been driving? I wasn't wearing a watch and couldn't check the time on Ethan's phone. I rested my head against the glass. At the first chance, I'd make a run for it. As soon as that door opened, I'd bolt out of that limo at lightning speed. But I had to defend myself. I would. When I was in third grade, I went to martial arts camp. We learned a few things, like how to do a roundhouse kick. And we learned that there are three places on the body that are super vulnerable: the eyeballs, throat, and crotch. If I had to poke Ricardo in the eyes, I would. Even though that sounded gross, I'd do whatever it took. But would Pyra try to stop me? Was she really on her dad's side? Was she willing to help me take over the world, or was she just trying to save him? I had no idea. I didn't want to hurt her, but if she got in my way, if you push a wolf into a corner, you're gonna get bitten. I curled up in the seat, trying to get comfortable. What were Tyler and Ethan doing? Were they trying to figure out how to rescue me? Even if they both had urns, they'd never give them to Ricardo. That wasn't even an option. Would they remember to talk to my mom so she wouldn't worry? She'd be home right now waiting for me to call after a long day of work at the diner. I thought about the diner's pancakes and the fluffy scrambled eggs and hot chocolate. My eyelids felt heavy. My head snapped forward. Crud! I'd almost fallen asleep. There was no way I would let myself fall asleep. I had to stay alert. Had to listen to everything Ricardo said. Had to watch where he was going so that when I texted Tyler and Ethan, I could tell them everything. But it was so hard to keep my eyes open. Maybe I could close them just for a moment. Only a moment.